Hi, my name is Kyle Croyle, Vice President of Startup Success and Investor Relations here at Newchip. I'm privileged to be joined by two esteemed gentlemen who are well-versed in the Canadian venture capital landscape, which is the focus for this panel. A warm welcome to Chris Cory, Senior Analyst at ventureLAB, and Karl Schabas, Managing Director at Vestra Ventures. I'd love if both of you guys could give a brief intro of yourself and your company and how you work within the Canadian startup ecosystem. Chris, please feel free to kick it off.
Sure. Thanks very much, Kyle. My name is Chris Cory. I head up the capital investment program at ventureLAB, and ventureLAB is a leading technology hub and incubator. We're located just north of Toronto, and we're focused on three pillars, essentially: healthcare, hardware, and enterprise software. We host demo days pretty regularly. We host investor hours. People like VCs like Carl, for example, will come in and get an early look at some of our client companies and provide mentorship, et cetera, along the way. So,
awesome. Thank you, Chris. And Carl?
So I'm Karl Schabas. I'm the Managing Director of Vestra Ventures. Vestra Ventures is the venture initiative within Constellation Software. For those not familiar with Constellation, Constellation's a publicly traded Canadian-based company that basically does a Berkshire Hathaway type model for vertical market software companies. So it goes around the world buying 100% of usually slow growth, mature, industry-specific software companies, improves operations, never sells, but rather uses the profits to buy more software companies. It's been a very successful model. There are now many hundreds of companies in the Constellation portfolio, and its stock has gone from $17 when it IPO'd in 2006 to over $1,700 today. Vestra Ventures, as the venture initiative, is investing in B2B vertical market software. I typically do seed stage. Check sizes vary between $500,000 and say $3 million. Typically take a board seat for Vestra Ventures and are typically looking for companies that are post-revenue, but that could benefit from the expertise, the best practices of Constellation, and in some cases, even with a direct partnership with one of our businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl. That's fascinating, and would love to kind of dive in more on some of that stuff. So, I guess just to kind of start off and to get both of your perspectives, because Carl, I know that we were talking earlier and you've only kind of been in the VC space for about 3 years, which I actually think is a unique perspective. And so you're not bogged down by, 30 years of experience. And Chris, obviously with ventureLAB, you have a really unique kind of position in the Canadian startup ecosystem. What are your general thoughts on the Canadian VC landscape, from a deal activity perspective, number of players, and this is just from your standpoint. Do you think it's a kind of a growing market? Do you see any trends with any particular industries? Carl, I know you're very focused on particular ones, and Chris likewise. But just some general thoughts on what are some of the big initiatives and activity points in Canada?
Okay. It looks like VC activity in Canada peaked in 2019, and like many other jurisdictions, the investment activity has fallen in Canada in 2020. We were down quite a bit at the end of the third quarter of 2020, but a lot of confidence in the industry. Perhaps uniquely, the Canadian government stepped in to offer dollar matching programs, at the height of the pandemic. And those programs were offered through the Business Development Bank of Canada and also the Export Development Canada as well. But lots of hope in the industry, interesting, and a lot of emerging industry in biotech, awesome, as you might imagine, right? So.
Yep, of course. And Carl, what's your experience been the last 3 years in the space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my first observation is, as someone new starting off to VC, the ecosystem in Toronto and Canada had everything that I needed to get started. There were plenty of attractive companies. There were lots of incubators like ventureLAB who were very welcoming and helped me build deal flow relatively quickly. The other players in the space were generally welcoming. I found no problem finding mentors and more experience there. I have noticed that there has been a bit of a slowdown towards 2020. I don't have the numbers the same way Chris does, but that does match my experience. I think angels in the seed stage in particular have pulled back a little bit, dealing with the uncertainty. I think it's become a little bit harder to raise new funds. As a corporate VC, I don't have that particular problem. And frankly, I think it's mirroring what I'm seeing in Constellation in the broader software industry. There's some industries that are in distress. If you're doing software for travel agents, it's just a really tough time. You're not going to be able to raise money. But I think what I've noticed is that even in industries that are supposedly unaffected, things like utilities, I'm finding that there was a reluctance for about 6 months, really up until the fall, to pull the trigger on larger deals. And I'm starting to see some more activity there. So I'm optimistic that even before the end of COVID, the companies in those industries will start resuming their growth rate. But there certainly was a pullback at the corporate level in just signing new deals, which means startups are getting fewer sales, which means it's harder to attract money. And that I saw all parts of that cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. And to kind of loop in Chris's as well. So is that kind of when the Canadian government, stepped in and tried to, not necessarily save companies, but, likewise in the United States and elsewhere, once March of 2020 hit with COVID, we saw investors not necessarily interested in new deal flow, but more or less securing their existing portfolio companies. And so did the Canadian government kind of step in at that time, or were these initiatives kind of already in place? And then as, to follow up on that, what has the effect been, from that government intervention in a way? Has it kind of created a more stable market? Do you expect some companies in 2021 and 2022 to really kind of take off because of it? We just kind of love to hear your thoughts there.
Sure. Well, there's two pieces to that. I think one is the Canadian government was very proactive in terms of supporting taxpayers, right? Supporting their citizens. So while the demand curve certainly dropped, it was at least sustained through this. On the VC side, the investment side, that it was a matching dollar program. So due diligence would be done by VCs or angel groups, and the government would follow. So private equity would lead, and the government would follow with matching funds. So I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Carl, have you had any interactions with the Canadian government in regards to your business operations? I would guess not necessarily, but
not me personally, but the companies I've invested in. There are two in particular that were largely saved by the Canadian government, at least until this point. There was one company I invested in February with perfect timing that basically sold to hotels to help them hire bartenders, waiters for large events. Their revenues effectively went to zero. They were never hugely high. It was a seed-stage company, but their revenues effectively went to zero. We would have probably had to put that company in hibernation if it wasn't for the government stepping in to pay, 75% of the wages of most of its employees. Now, it remains to be seen whether that will be sufficient to save my investment and what will happen to the company once events start happening. But the fact is that we are hopeful that company come May or June will be in a position where it will still have most of the investment that we gave it and enough employees to allow it to hopefully resume growth.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, from your experience dealing with a lot of startups in Canada, do you find that they are targeting specifically Canadian investors, or are they going cross-border and trying to target U.S. investors as well? And then kind of to piggyback off that, I'm really interested to hear, and we talked about this before the call, but how U.S. investors kind of view Canadian deal flow and its potential attractiveness.
Well, sure. So in response to the first part of your question, I mean, Canadians look south. I guess it's more likely to look south depending on the industry that they're in. So, for example, there's a medical device and hardware, two areas that we're trying to get more involved in. Those companies are more likely to look to the U.S. for investment because the ecosystem is fully developed and it's been around for many, many years. We like to try to get U.S. investors up to Canada because they'll find the technology is terrific, and also that the valuations are usually much more investor friendly than they might be, south of the border. I don't think there's nearly the competition for those kinds of companies up here than there is stateside.
Yeah, I'm always kind of curious as to. We have a number of Canadian companies in our program, and they definitely look kind of cross-border as well.
Yep.
But I think one of the things that we haven't yet tapped at Newchip is the opportunities for U.S.-based companies to target Canadian VCs. Now, obviously, from my experience, a lot of the Canadian VCs are kind of in your main pockets, whether it's Toronto, Vancouver, you name it. I'm not sure if you guys have this intel, but within the Canadian VC landscape, are you finding that more institutions or investment firms are popping up in other locales, or are they still primarily kind of focused in those main cities?
I think they're mostly focused, where the deal flow is, and
Sure.
An enormous amount of activity in Toronto. Carl, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I found deals in Toronto area, including Kitchener, Waterloo, with a lot of deal flow, and Montreal are the big ones. I do see some in Vancouver. I do see some in Ottawa. I've seen a little bit in Calgary. I've seen almost nothing outside of those areas. Of course, you have to remember that Canada's a tenth the size of the United States. I just listed 5 cities that have something. So, to be fair comparison with the US, you'd have to name 50 that have some sort of startup scene. I'm not sure it should be unexpected given the size of our country that the startups are concentrated in, primarily 2 or 3 cities with maybe a broader number of 6 or 7 that have some startup scene.
Absolutely. Well, so where do you guys see the Canadian VC landscape then going in, say, 5 years? Is it, is it expansion kind of into other cities? Is it from an industry perspective, kind of, Chris, to your point, becoming a little bit more industry agnostic versus, focused on, some of the kind of software or life science spaces? Do you kind of see the Canadian VC landscape evolving in that way, or are there other trends that you're kind of anticipating over the next 3 to 5 years?
That's a great question. I think that Carl might be a little better because he's living a little better able to to answer that question than me.
I'm not sure I would necessarily see more expansion into other cities. I think as an investor, and in a lot of cases for the startups, there's something to be said for having as large an ecosystem as possible all in one place, having the investment capital, having the mentorship. I mean, not too different from the Silicon Valley approach. And while I'm not trying to suggest that we would get there, if anything, over the past 2 or 3 years, I've tended to see a little bit more centralization in sort of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver that I might expect to continue. If anything, I'd almost like to see a little bit more coordination between those different cities. I find that there's a lot of coordination between the different organizations in the Greater Toronto area, but that if you want to go to Montreal, there's less communication, that you're almost tackling it fresh, a little bit the same with Vancouver. And I don't actually think that benefits anybody involved in the ecosystem. So I'm hoping to see a trend towards greater coordination between sort of the centers that already exist.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Chris, I would love to kind of dive into a little bit of kind of ventureLAB and how you guys really fit into the startup ecosystem and how you work with folks like Carl. I think you guys have a really awesome business model and are doing some, incredible things. So we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So we try to, for us, it's we're trying to match companies, with the right investors, right? So that everybody's interests are aligned. It just makes it, it makes it easier. And we try to engage people like Carl, relatively early in the process. So sort of, a few months before they're actually, ready to raise. And so, Carl can get a look, and companies get a chance, get some very, valuable feedback along the way. So that's we do demo days regularly, investor hours regularly. We like that kind of activity. Our big focus right now is we're trying to extend our relationships south of the border, and also internationally as well. We think we have some terrific companies, and all companies are looking, first and foremost to develop, expand sales, expand their business. They're looking for customer relationships, channel relationships, and of course, investor relationships as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. What other locales are you guys looking to partner with? Obviously, there's many startup hubs, Tel Aviv, London, many places in Southeast Asia. I'm just kind of curious what ones you guys are looking at, in addition to south of the border.
Well, we're very interested in what's happening in Tel Aviv, for sure. Very, very exciting situation over there. And also we're developing relationships in France and the UK at the moment. And we have invitations out. We have our first international demo day coming up at the end of March. So we're excited to bring these foreign investors in to have a look at our companies.
Awesome. And Carl, what, obviously 2021 has just started, but what are you most looking forward to this year from a deal flow perspective, or even just kind of general industry trends, with in the kind of corporate venture space, from a tech standpoint, what are you most excited about?
So from a tech standpoint, I'm looking to see a resumption of sales, particularly in sort of cutting edge technologies and software like AI machine learning. AI machine learning in a lot of industries, I think, is still seen as a luxury, something that companies know that they should be doing, but maybe they don't have to do today. And in the COVID era just said, we're putting these projects on hold. I'm a huge fan of the potential of AI machine learning. I've invested in some companies that do that. I'd like to do more. So the trend I'm really hoping to see in 2021 is a resumption of some of the sales for those types of products across various industries. The other thing I'm looking forward to, I think I've done 8 deals to date. We're still fairly small, of which 7 have been in Canada, 1 have been in the US. But I would say that over the past year, my deal flow has diversified a bit because I've been relying on Zoom meetings. I've been relying more on the army of people who work at Constellation, scouring the world for M&A activity, which is a global activity. And frankly, the advantage of being close to the founder has just not existed for the past year. So my pipeline is much more international than it was at this time last year. And I think it would be nice if that translated into some deals. I always think the majority of my deals will be in Canada, but it would be nice if I could get a couple of US deals and maybe even a European or UK deal or 2 done this year.
Awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time. Not sure, I'll if you guys have any parting thoughts, I definitely would love for you guys to share anything. But if not, I've really enjoyed chatting, learning more about the Canadian, VC landscape. I think there are some incredible opportunities to work together. Obviously, ventureLAB, you guys are doing some great stuff. I've been working with some incredible companies, likewise here at Newchip, and then obviously, Carl, you're always open for deal flow, and so it's really nice to see kind of the collaboration amongst all of the ecosystem players, not just within the U.S. or within Canada, but cross border as well. Any parting thoughts on your guys' side? It's okay if not.
Only that 2020 was a tough year for everyone, particularly for startups, but there is still plenty of VC money there, and I think everyone's expectation is that 2021 will be better than 2020, and I think there are going to be some great opportunities out there, both for investors and for startups, and I'm looking forward to pursuing them.
Yeah,
awesome.
And we have some terrific companies at ventureLAB, and we're really excited to continue to work with them and see them funded in the future. So.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and look forward to working together well into the future.
Thanks very much, Kyle.
All
It's
right,
great.
thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.
Right.